What the fuck?
The Flash is one of the worst movies I have ever seen in my life. For the past few years, I have tried not to make any negative content on this channel. I think it's a cheap way of getting engagement, and lots of very crappy people on YouTube use negativity to exploit its algorithm. But this so-called movie was just too much for me.
There's a baby.
It is offensively bad. Like someone handing you a book where each individual page has been used to wipe a slimy, wet poop. And then they tell you that James Gunn and Tom Cruise really loved this poopy book, so you should too. They really said that. Yeah, the best DC movie since The Dark Knight. Someone said that. Someone out there, I found it, said that. Anyway, here is The Flash.
It's a truly profound narrative failure that can't even decide on its own identity. It's constantly torn between being an okay stoner comedy and an unbearable corporate product based on the concept of,
look at how many Batmans and Supermans there are! Look at them! Point at them like Leo and eat your cameo goop! You pig! You fat, filthy pig full of money! Money for me! The CEO of Warner Brothers!
I'm going to break down exactly everything that this piece of garbage tries to pass off as cinema. There will be spoilers, but you shouldn't care because fudge this movie. It's terrible, and you don't need to see it for me to tear it apart. Of course, to be fair, here are its good points. Number 1, it is sometimes actually funny. Number 2, Sasha Calle, which is a really great Supergirl. And that's it. So I guess that takes us to the shit. To really understand just how badly this movie handles Supergirl, you have to understand two things. 1. Unlike a lot of her on-screen portrayals, Supergirl in the comics is not traditionally that similar in personality to her cousin, Superman. She's a character who has witnessed the destruction of her homeworld, and she still remembers everyone she lost there. She has an entire history that was blown up, almost right in front of her. She wasn't raised on Earth. That means that she's angrier, she's willing to kill, and she has no particular love for humanity. She only cares about them because her cousin does. That rage and that pain due to loss is what separates her from Clark Kent. And those elements are portrayed superbly by Sasha Calle in the movie.
So, what's the problem?
She is cast aside. She dies over and over again, and then Flash goes back to his universe and leaves that portrayal of Supergirl behind. And all her deaths are there just to teach him a lesson. He needs to learn that some things in time are irreversible.
It's called fridging, and it's been happening in media, and especially superhero media, a lot.
And it's a trope we see over and over again. One where women in a fictional male's life are killed to teach him an important life lesson, or just to raise the stakes of the story. Why not? Not only does The Flash lean on this, now very outdated, sexist trope, it leans on it so hard that it says the fridging is a cosmic inevitability.
Every problem has a solution.
A woman's death is so pivotal to the male character's development that even if he goes back in time, he can't save her.
Great job, The Flash!
But that's barely scratching the surface of this movie's many sins. There's so much more to get into.
So, will you help us?
Pass.
Flash!
There are a lot of Batmen in this movie. You could very easily make an argument that the story is more of a celebration of Batman than it is an actual story about the Flash.
And by itself, the concept of having multiple actors who've incarnated the same role appear in a movie isn't necessarily a bad idea.
Spider-Man No Way Home is an example of a film that does this very well. Each actor brings their unique take on the character to the story, as well as their individual traumas and character arcs. The big problem with The Flash is that all of the Batmen that appear are totally interchangeable. Keaton, Affleck, and even Clooney are all playing the same Bruce Wayne, rather than embodying a different version of the character. If Affleck or Clooney had been the older version of Bruce Wayne in the alternate timeline instead of Keaton, it would not have affected the story at all. Not one iota. In fact, the whole thing about Affleck's Batman was that he is an older version of the character already. Maybe if we had more of a comparison, maybe Affleck's Batman could be angrier, more hardened compared to a more caring and comedic Keaton Batman. But hilariously, they play the same character, an older, aloof Batman who doesn't really want to hang out with the Flash, but does because he needs to save the world.
Bruce?
And that lack of differentiation means Keaton was added in simply as a play on nostalgia.
I'm Batman.
From his outfit to the return of the Danny Elfman theme, it was all about getting people to point at the screen and go, "Ooh, that's the thing from that other thing." There was no creative or story-driven reason behind the decision. It was a grasp at getting older people to eat their member berries for Batman.
Remember Ghostbusters? Oh, I remember.
This is especially hilarious even as a cynical nostalgia play, because anyone, including this guy who has done any type of basic demographic research, knows that older people go to the cinemas far less than younger people. And younger people aren't nostalgic for Michael Keaton Batman, they're nostalgic for Christian Bale.
So having Keaton return as Batman had no impact on the story, and was a failed attempt to draw in nostalgic audiences who never go to the movies anyway. A failure both creatively and as a business decision. How embarrassing for the executives at Warner Bros. Discovery. And people say that CEO and executive pay is justified. Hilarious. And speaking of embarrassing,
This is a bad idea.
there isn't too much more to say here that the title card doesn't. Like, look at all this!
Baby.
The CW Flash show has some better sequences than this, and the CW Flash show famously had tiny budgets and not great CGI. This movie cost upwards of $200 million. When a movie's that expensive and it looks this bad, you do know what that means, right?
No.
It means that, like in the Marvel video I made covering this topic, a lot of VFX studios raced to the bottom, likely offering to do this movie for as cheap a rate as possible. What that means is that those studios then pay their employees a pittance, making them work long, excruciating hours with not enough time to complete the project in a way that satisfies anyone. And a note on that, a lot of those VFX workers are now voting to unionize, and good for them.
There's a popular theory that Warner even used AI on this movie to keep the CG cheap.
But we can get to that in a later section. There's still so much more to go!
The point is, this was a massive failure in management. For a movie to be this expensive and look this bad shows you just how poorly managed things are over at Warner Bros. Discovery. Which is interesting because their CEO, David Zaslav, was Fortune's 2021 most overpaid CEO in the entire world. He made over $200 million in that year, or almost 1,000 times more than an average Hollywood writer. And that year was a bit of an outlier for him because of the Warner Brothers and Discovery merger. So last year, he only brought in a puny $39 million. Averaged out over 5 years, he's at almost 400 times more than the average writer. All of that pay for what is clearly some not-so-good management on his key franchises, wouldn't you say? So we have executives who are making bad calls on VFX management and on the casting of Batman. I wonder if there are any other casting decisions we could perhaps call into question.
You used monkey as a dartboard! Wait, what?
Much has been made of Ezra Miller's alleged crimes in the lead up to The Flash's release, all epitomized by that hilarious video of their face appearing wanted on a TV at a party that they are also attending.
And as much as I have to grit my teeth to say this phrase, I have to give Warner Brothers the benefit of the doubt here. Because the principal photography on The Flash had finished years ago. Though, I guess you could then take the benefit of the doubt away, because what were they doing sitting on a movie for 3 to 4 years instead of just releasing it? And if you're gonna say COVID, that didn't stop them with Wonder Woman 84, did it? But regardless of that, the movie was mostly done by the time Ezra Miller participated in their alleged burst of criminal activity.
And to further take that benefit of the doubt away, this is a studio that cancelled the release of Batgirl, both as a tax write-off and because James Gunn was being brought on to reboot the DC universe. So they could very easily have cancelled The Flash for the same exact reasons.
But they didn't. They chose to move forward with a movie where Ezra Miller plays not one, but 2 of the main characters. And to put it bluntly, they are not very good.
Shut up! Shut up!
Though Miller is mostly okay at the comedy in the movie, sometimes even quite funny, every dramatic moment feels like they're trying to show just how hard they can act. Just so much acting!
You're going back to kill Mom? No! You're staying!
I'm not exaggerating when I say I've seen more believable emotion at my local community theater. And even the comedy ends up wearing very thin.
I have to shit. Outside!
Maybe if the 2 Barry Allens had been a bit different from each other, but instead we get weird, awkward Barry, and weird, awkward Barry who is also a stoner.
Molecular structure of solid object.
Which means it all gets very awkward.
Looking good, Flash.
Well, thank...
This is all compounded by the fact that the Flashpoint story, the evil corrupted by time Barry Allen story, and Barry having to let his mother die are all stories that have been recently told on the CW Flash TV show. And the scenes where Barry has to say bye to his mom are, I'm gonna say, objectively better in the TV show.
And we love you, Mom.
In the movie, Ezra Miller continues to be awkward.
Why?
They take the emotional climax of the movie and just waste it. That weird tone is carried through to the very last shot of the movie, when Barry sees he's messed up the timeline yet again, and what happens? And that's the final shot of the current DC universe. It is terrible. It's so terrible, I honestly thought I'd dreamed it. For several days afterwards.
Baby.
But it doesn't even hold a candle to the worst crime of this so-called film. This is disgusting. I actually cannot believe it's a real thing that was put into a blockbuster movie. At the climax of its final big CG action sequence, the Flash inserts a series of windows into alternate DC universes. And instead of doing anything creative with its current slate of actors, it resurrects dead DC actors via visual effects.
These include George Reeves in his original incarnation of Superman, Christopher Reeves, of course, and Adam West as Batman. Now here's the thing, there's only speculation out there about whether or not the studio, Warner Brothers, got permission from Adam West and Christopher Reeves' families to put their images in this movie. But regardless of that, it still feels incredibly gross. It is a perverse and cynical decision that was, in all likelihood, motivated by an executive who wants you to point at the screen like the Leo meme and go, look, there's those people. Even though those people have no bearing on the plot of this movie or the character arc of Barry Allen.
No, the studio digitally exhumed the graves of these actors for what they hoped would be a crowd-pleasing moment. Not only does it look inhuman, it feels wrong. Especially so when you consider we now know from the actors' strike that the movie studios intend to have the rights to an actor's likeness in perpetuity after just one day of work. Why do the studios want that? Well, it's so they can have AI puppeteer the digital bodies of these actors to create new stories without ever needing to pay for additional writers, actors, or digital artists. And here's where the theory that this was their first test run of that very concept holds some water. Internet sleuths have noticed that Adam West's cameo as Batman features him in his classic Batman suit, but without the Batman ears.
A Batman cowl without its iconic ears is not a mistake that a human digital artist would make. But it is a mistake that is very in line with the mistakes we see occur in AI-generated art. You know, missing fingers, missing eyes, no noses, no bat ears.
To further that point, Helen Slater, who played classic Supergirl, is still alive, but they didn't bring her back in live action. No, she was also a weird CG puppet, as was Nicolas Cage's Superman from that Justice League movie that never happened. Whether or not they were AI generated, this was definitely a weird pilot case for using digital puppets of actors rather than paying for their actual on-set appearance. And it feels all the worse when it's done to actors who have passed away, and especially George Reeves.
He famously hated, abhorred playing Superman, and it's very likely that the stress of that role played a big part in his untimely death. But that's not the worst part. To my knowledge, and the research I've done on the internet, he was not succeeded by any living family. That means there was no estate or living family for Warner Brothers to ask the permission of to use his image, which means they used a dead actor's image without his consent.
That is, quite frankly, ruthlessly fucking evil. And it's a window into the future these studios and their executives want for the film industry. A window The Flash as a movie was trying to open. Thankfully, it was a massive box office failure. But it's time someone stood up to them. And hey, people are. At the time of recording, the SAG-AFTRA and WGA strikes are in full force, trying to hold these greedy, artless executives to account. And if you would like to support them, I've put some links in the description below. As for The Flash, this was the diarrhea icing on an already fecal cake. Look, if you liked this movie for some reason, then congrats, I guess. You're more enlightened than I am, or so you must be telling yourself. But the more I think about this movie, the sicker I feel. Even in the process of making this video, I had to take a ton of breaks, because it makes me so viscerally angry.
Everything about this turd of a movie is repulsive.
The fridging of its only female lead, to the cynical nostalgia bait, to the mismanagement that led us to having Ezra Miller as a double lead, supported by terrible CGI, and to the abhorrent use of CG zombie puppets, it's all just terrible. I left the cinema disappointed, and every moment I've spent thinking about it since has only made it worse. I hate that this movie even exists, and I strongly recommend you never do yourself the harm of watching it. Go doom scroll through TikTok for 2.5 hours, because that is a better use of your time.
No! Please. I just got attacked by my cat.
I'd like to thank my patrons who have stuck with me through my interminably long production periods. I'd promise that I'm gonna turn it around. The next one will come around faster, but maybe it won't. We'll see what happens. Regardless of that, they help make this channel possible. They inspire me to keep going when I doubt myself, and they are why I feel okay taking a risk on a video as impassioned as this, because God knows I ain't ever gonna be hired by Warner Brothers.